Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for making the time to be here. Our special guest for the day, we have Mr. Sanjiv ji and AVM Khot ji. It's a real honor to have you, Sanjiv ji, here, especially with Parliament in session, that you've made the time to actually come down from Delhi to be with us. Thank you very much. And so you've come all the way from Ahmedabad, being tasked with, driving the space mission for the country. Thank you very much for being here. It's a real pleasure. And we have our friends from the investment world, Vikram and Gautam. So thank you. And Shashank, well, now the billionaire. So many of you can take some tips from him as to how to build a unicorn. So without much ado, we'll start now. And Sanjeev ji, thank you. It's been a Startup India is now about to complete a decade since it was set up in 2016 and has played a very important role in building India's global identity and catapulting us to the world stage. So, you tell how has your journey been so far, and what do you see as the next decade for India's startup ecosystem? You've architected Startup Mahakumbh, made India one of the largest, third largest actually startup, nation in the world, and brought huge global attention. So, what do you see the next decade looking like?
Thank you, Sunali ma'am. And what you have said, the biggest example is the quality of startups which have come here. In fact, I was so happy to see that earlier we were speaking that we don't have deep tech or manufacturing startups, but today it was a pleasure to see such good startups and they are doing cutting edge research. And when you say what has been the decadal growth of startup, in 2016, Startup India was started by Honorable Prime Minister, and in his speech, he said, the initial speech, he said that if a startup generates 5 jobs, it will be a great service to the country. And from 500 startups, now we have almost 200,000 startups, and the startup ecosystem has given direct job to more than 2 million people. And indirectly, I think there are millions and millions of people employed through startups. The main change has been change in the mindset. Before 2016, uh, entrepreneurship was not looked upon as something which a student will do. Probably, if a graduate went to their parent and said that they want to start a business, तो पेरेंट्स कई बार कहते थे क्या धंधा करेगा, गवर्नमेंट जॉब देख लो। पढ़ाई कॉमर्स, साइंस एंड आर्ट्स में बंधी हुई थी, कोई इंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के लिए कुछ भी नहीं था। एंड इंटरप्रेन्योरशिप was not looked upon very well. In fact, जिसको कोई धंधा नहीं मिलता था वो इंटरप्रेन्योरशिप में जाता था, जिसको अच्छी नौकरी नहीं मिल पाती थी वो इंटरप्रेन्योरशिप में जाते हैं। बट आफ्टर 2016 एवरीथिंग हैज चेंज्ड। आज अगर पेरेंट से बच्चा पूछता है कि मेरे को स्टार्टअप करना है, तो पेरेंट पूछते हैं पैसा कहाँ से लाएगा, हाउ विल यू नेविगेट द वैली ऑफ डेथ, what is your moat. All the questions have changed. So this is how startup has ecosystem has evolved. 2016 से पहले हमारे यहाँ यूनिकॉर्न थे ही नहीं, आज हमारे बीच एक यूनिकॉर्न बैठे हुए हैं। दो ऑफिशियली वी डोंट से कि हम यूनिकॉर्न इज ए फैक्टर ऑफ वैल्यूएशन, बट द फैक्ट रिमेन्स दैट आवर स्टार्टअप्स हैव बिकम वन ऑफ द बेस्ट इन द वर्ल्ड। और हमारे बीच में जो चर्चा होती है ना कि हम थर्ड लार्जेस्ट स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम है। अभी आपने कहा कि अगला हमारा ग्रोथ क्या होना चाहिए, तो हम थर्ड लार्जेस्ट से बेस्ट स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम बने और उसके लिए प्रयास होना चाहिए और हो भी रहा है। एंड धीरे धीरे स्टार्टअप एक जो ट्रेंड लाइन वो चेंज हुआ। इनिशियली जो सक्सेसफुल स्टार्टअप्स थे दे वेर फ्रॉम टेक फील्ड, वेदर इट वाज फिनटेक और अदर टेक, एडुटेक, बट नाउ slowly and slowly the country is moving towards deep tech. It was very heartening to see a deep tech startup just now startup manufacturing, and this has been the change. And regarding next 10 years, we have to consolidate on uh, the growth which we have already done, and probably now we need to focus more on quality, uh, having brands. Unfortunately, very few Indian brands are recognized all over the world, HDFC being one of them. And I think most of you would you be knowing that HDFC in itself is a classic case of startup. When Mr. Parak wanted to create this company, he was at a young age of 66 years. When we think of retiring, he had a problem statement, and problem statement was very common. But it is the great persons who understand common problems and find a solution. The question was how to provide house to a Indian working class population who had just started his job through house financing. And rest, as they say, is the history. Earlier, before that, people were building their houses when they were at the fag end of their career, at the retirement. What Mr. Parak did, that he made housing finance available to everyone, so that even 30-year-old can have his own house. And this was a startup idea which has become such a big idea that we are all sitting under the edges of HDFC to discuss about the startup ecosystem. और फ्यूचर की बात है तो मैं इसको बस एक, अगर आपकी अनुमति हो तो
जी
एक
सर।
कविता का कुछ पंक्ति सुनाना चाहूंगा, जो स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम के लिए बहुत ही लागू होती है कि चढ़े हिमालय की चोटी पर फिर भी ऊपर चढ़ना है, हमें हिमालय के शिखरों पर नया हिमालय गढ़ना है. सो स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम हैज टू go much beyond what they have done till now.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, AVMG, your journey has been very interesting. And, you know, when we first spoke, and now I'm glad you're here today, being India's single window nodal agency to facilitate private participation in the space tech space and make it as mainstream as it can be. What are the opportunities you foresee in the space tech sector, and from the point of view of a founder as well as an investor?
Oh, thank you, Sunali, for that question. Very good evening to everybody, and our thanks to the HDFC Tech Innovators organization, group companies for this opportunity. This is one of the questions that we get asked very often. What are the real opportunities? Because space is not one of your traditional sectors. It's not very well understood, except for those who are directly working in it. It's been a journey of discovery for me as well, starting from my last appointment in the Air Force, which was in the Defense Space Agency, and then a natural kind of a transition to the private sector and enablement. So the opportunities are actually limitless. To start with, there are some very identifiable core space sectors. For example, rockets, which is the launch segment, or satellites and spacecraft themselves, which is the space segment. The things that are not as visible but are still intuitively understood, which are the ground stations and the ground environment, which includes processing systems, networks, security, data archival, and the entire ground environment. Then there are the downstream applications, which means the data that flows from space and where that is converted into applications, which may be products and which may be services, and which are used by the end users. End users could be you and me. When we use Google Maps, when we use Swiggy and Zomato, we're actually using space technology as a retail individual customer. And then there are enterprise level, and then there are government level applications. And they are literally limitless in millions if one actually starts to go into it. And the fifth and one of the most exciting areas, and we had one startup here talking about that, is the in-orbit economy and the outer space economy, which transcends everything on Earth and actually starts looking at energy harvesting in-orbit servicing, manufacture, refueling, and then going on to planetary exploration in terms of resource mining and so on. And it's no longer this stuff of science fiction anymore. All these are real things happening. So those are the kind of opportunities for those who are excited by the possibilities there. In addition to that, let me just break it down because there's something for everybody in space. There's the manufacturing sector. If you're in manufacturing, in some way, your products can feed into space because there is no such thing as space technology. It's a conglomeration of multifarious technologies: propulsion, electronics, sensors, power, satellite bus and those creations, all of those. So all of these things come together, which means the huge component level, sub-assembly level ecosystem. To give an example, ISRO currently has an ecosystem of about 750 plus vendors all across the country who do work at the component level. So there are people who have opportunity there as well. There is the opportunity in space services, which means the applications that come, to all of us and to government and so on. Also such things as ground stations as a service, mission operations as a service. All of these things are traditionally done in government, but now open to the private sector. So the opportunities are literally enormous. The scope is very, very vast. And then, of course, there is the global market. Our current strategy in space, we're looking at about going from $8.4 billion of Indian space economy in 2022-23 figures over a decade to 44 billions. And that's not merely a paper aspiration, it's an estimate. We can make it there. And out of this, 25% is supposed to come from the global market, so through export. So those are the kind of opportunities that are waiting for the taking in this space sector.
Thank you, sir. Let's move to Vikram. So, Vikram, IvyCap has been a fund that has not only institutionalized endowment funds, but you've also raised domestic capital, and you do early stage investing and you do growth stage investing. So, very interesting to hear from both of you different views. So, tell us, how do you see, do you see more of endowment funds coming up in the country? Because a lot of the startups here would like to see, is that actually something that's going to happen more in India?
Yeah, first of all, Sunali, congratulations to you and the entire HDFC team here for putting up such an amazing, startup showcase and also identifying some of the best startups. And I think I remember having this discussion from the early days of doing this, and it's amazing to see the quality of startups. So congratulations to the entire team. Now, regarding the endowments, we conceptualized the endowment model at the time when we conceptualized IvyCap model. In fact, the very first fund that we set up in 2011, we said 25% of our carry, which is the profits that the fund managers make, we said we'll give it back to set up the endowment funds across India. And of course, we are very fortunate to have started building very good carry now in Fund 1 and started setting up endowments and set up India's first endowment fund at IIT Delhi in 2019. And that became the starting point for the endowments across the country. And now we are helping other IITs and other education institutions to set up their endowments. And I think it was very interesting to see that when we're looking at the global numbers, when you looked at the size of the endowments across the world, the 100th rank in terms of size of the endowments was $1.2 billion. The 100th rank. And in India, we didn't have any single endowment funds. So it definitely made a lot of sense to actually do it for India. And I think the key piece of that is actually putting that money back into very early stage startups, especially startups who don't get attention at TRL 1 to TRL 4 and 5 stages. Usually those startups don't get that attention. So I think that stage, typically looking for mostly grant capital, can only come from such endowments. So that has been something which I'm personally very excited about, and we continue to actually contribute from our carry structure. And in fact, yesterday we launched a report at IVCA about domestic capital. And I think it's quite interesting to see how the domestic capital has come a long way. And endowments would obviously one of the pockets. And that we also very encouraged and excited to see that the pension funds are now coming in a big way in this area as well. And I think looking forward to really seeing these pockets of capital to come and support the startups. And I think given the fact that a number of funds When I started IvyCap, we had just 8 funds at that time, and today we are talking about 1,500 plus registered funds. And I think that kind of a phenomenal growth that we've seen. And also, if you look at the AUMs over this 14, 15 years, from $15 billion to $250 billion, which is a CAGR of 23% over a 14, 15-year period, which is very substantial. And I think that talks about how far we have come as a country and as a startup ecosystem. And Sanjeevji was talking about how from 2016, we have actually come to become the third largest and poised to become maybe the largest startup ecosystem in the world. And I think I totally agree with what he said, given the quality of startups and now with deep tech startups, especially in space tech and also in defense tech. And I think we are quite excited about the focus that is going into those stages of startups, especially with the RDI fund, which is a $12 billion fund, which has just been launched, which is very, very exciting. And I think, as Sir was saying, that students are now becoming entrepreneurs at that stage, seeing the ecosystem developing, and what you're doing at HDFC is actually something very, very amazing and very supportive to the startups. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Vikram. So before we go to the billionaire founder on the stage, let's ask you as a growth capital, as someone who looks at, provides growth capital. You've been both at Sequoia, now Peak 15, and now A91 Partners. So you've worked with lots of successful founders and unicorns, who built unicorns. You've had Yashish, whether it's Policy Bazaar, Upasna, MobiKwik, etc. So what do you think makes these founders stick, right? What allowed them to kind of get to where they did?
Should I ask Shashank? I'm the wrong person to answer this
Yes,
question.
okay, you worked with him as well, fine.
I think the answer is unique to each individual, to be honest. We have seen, I've been doing this now for 18 years, and we've seen founders start companies at 19, and we've seen founders start companies at 79, right? So it's impossible for me to believe that what makes the 79-year-old tick and the 19-year-old tick are the same, right? Bell curve, the middle of the bell curve is probably in the 20s, 30s, right? Early 30s, late 30s, maybe. I think we've thought a little bit about why is there such a big difference today versus 18 years back when I started doing this on behalf of Sequoia Capital. Almost all of the investments we were making were with conglomerate groups. And now almost none of the investments that anybody makes is with conglomerate. Yes, there is some, but if you think of upcoming companies, the vast majority is independent entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're bootstrapped, sometimes there is venture capital, etc. So I think what makes people tick is very unique to each individual. But I think what has happened is that after liberalization in 1991, the cohort of people that has some experience and has some capability, capital, confidence to say, you know what, now we can build our own firm. We've worked at HDFC Bank, or we've worked at Google, or we've worked at Microsoft, or we worked at Coca-Cola. And whether it's consumer, whether it's software, whether it is payments, whether it is financial services, that cohort of people is, I think, maybe 20 times bigger than it was in 2007 when I started doing it. And it's just because the accumulated gains of liberalization, accumulated number of people that have passed through, learned something, and have got the courage, if you will, to some degree, but also when Flipkart got created and when Flipkart then got sold, I think it gave everyone permission to say, this can also happen. And that was not restricted just to the young folks. 5 years back, we invested in Kamesh at Digit when he was just 1 year into his journey, and he started the business when he was 50. But he had done it for Bajaj Allianz and so on for a long time, and then eventually he said, "Look, let's do it ourselves." So, the exact motivation is very different for everyone. But what is remarkable to us and what really excites us is that cohort of people. And we're seeing it in chemicals, we're seeing it in software, we're seeing it everywhere we look, we're seeing that. So that's fantastic, because that is sort of modern professional Indian entrepreneurship, we call it.
Got it. Thanks, Gautam. So, Shashank, coming to you, he's talked about, all founders range from 19 to 79. So, you started at 19 pretty much as a college student with a dream, Harshal and you, and to now building a global company. So, you've progressed even from a unicorn now to a global company. And so, what is your advice for founders in this room, especially from your early days when you guys were, a Y Combinator startup?
Okay, thanks, Sonali. So I started a company at 22, not at 19.
Okay.
So, uh, the best thing about uh, being the founder, right, is just how much you can exercise your creativity, right? Because at the end of the day, you'd see this not just like in one specific industry, right? But in almost every industry, a lot of frontier push is made by small firms, startups, which can move very fast, right? And over time, like incumbents adopt a lot of innovation that happens and scale it, right? So one thing that I always tell founders is, if you have started on this journey, right, you should have a dream, you should have a vision of what you bring to the table, of what the world can look like 5 years or 10 years from now, which nobody is betting on, or nobody is thinking about, right? And there's so many technology shifts that are happening today, whether that is electric or AI, right? Even in the West, like self-driving has taken off. Deep tech is gonna be significant change again, right? Space tech, defense tech. If you look at just the macros also, India today is like 4 trillion economy. It'll reach 7 trillion plus by 2030, 10 trillion plus by 2035. So there's more GDP outcome that will get created even within India than what is present today, right? And and all the um, all the doubts that startups used to face 10 years ago when I started, right? Which is that mostly startups are raising venture funding, or they're not profitable, they're mostly burning, they can't go public. All the doubts that startups used to have gone away. Startups have become mainstream in such a significant way that it's fairly glamorized today. I, on the other hand, think that, I mean, although there's a lot of capital and opportunity in the market, right? Often feel like there are a lot of VCs, family offices that have come in, a lot of capital that is available. But the entrepreneurs or the founders in India can be a lot more ambitious than what it exists today. And you can really see how much dynamism or how much ambition that is present in countries like Silicon Valley, in areas like Silicon Valley, or even if you go on one tour of China, and that'll sort of open your eyes, like how much growth is possible, how much you can develop in a short period of time. All of which has really changed from even last like 20 or 10 years ago. So all of this to say, I think it's very good to be optimistic. It's good to have like a very ambitious plan. You can fail, I think that's okay, right? uh, but like if you have passion, if you have belief, confidence in your ideas, then there's no better time than to build today. There's a lot of a huge enabling ecosystem in terms of fundraising, in terms of talent that is available, right? But you need, at the end of the day, the linchpin or the core of the startup ecosystem is always going to be the founders and the entrepreneurs. Everyone else is going to be an enabling ecosystem, enabling partner, right? So that's what. So today is the best time to build. Lot of technology shifts happening, so you can anchor on the technology shift. You can think like, what are the change that you want to create in the world, and you'll see that the whole ecosystem will come together to enable you. But at the end of the day, you need to have the confidence, the optimism, the vision to drive that change in the country, in the ecosystem, and I think everything comes together to support in a very beautiful way.
That's a lot of good advice. Thank you, Shashank. So, sir, back to you, Sanjeev ji. So, tell us, we have lots of budding entrepreneurs in this room, and, we've heard lots of good things about what's happening in India. You've also been traveling all over the world, and you see startups in different countries. You're, forging global partnerships. What makes Indian startups distinctive? What makes us stand out? How do you see us as different? Or do you see any other countries that are doing better than us? So, what's your view there?
मैं अभी इज़राइल गया था मिनिस्टर साहब के साथ फॉर एफटीए नेगोशिएशंस एंड वी हैड टेकन ए बिजनेस डेलीगेशन आल्सो देयर बट एज आई एम वेरी मच इंटरेस्टेड इन स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम, मेरे मन में बस एक ही प्रश्न था कि ये इजरायली इतना अच्छा कैसे स्टार्टअप में है, वाई दे आर द बेस्ट। एंड हमारी जो पॉपुलेशन है ऑलमोस्ट 150 टाइम्स है इसराइल की, पर आज आप किसी से भी स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम में पूछेंगे तो बताएगा कि इजराइल इज वन ऑफ द बेस्ट स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम। मैं वहाँ स्टार्टअप से मिला, उनका एक बहुत ही अच्छा एक इनोवेशन सेंटर है, एंड I dream that one day we have also a innovation center like that, and probably we will work for also। और उसमें कॉर्पोरेट हाउसेज को भी आगे आना चाहिए, जिसमें उन्होंने 3000 साल में क्या इनोवेशन हुआ है उसको दिखाया है। एंड बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग स्टोरी, एक कैसे पेन ड्राइव का कैसे उन्होंने इजाद किया, इस पे ही स्टार्ट होता है। बट उसकी जगह मैं ये कहना चाहूँगा कि मैंने उनसे पूछा कि व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस, व्हाई यू आर सक्सेसफुल। तो जो उन्होंने जवाब दिया वो बड़ा डिफरेंट है कि हम एक ऐसी ज्योग्राफी में रहते हैं जहां हम हार नहीं मानते हैं, हम गिरते हैं पर गिर के संभलते हैं। प्रॉब्ली यही हमारे स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम में एक जो फेलियर का डर है, अभी शशांक सर ने भी यही कहा कि हमें अपने फेलियर से नहीं डरना चाहिए। हमको अपने देश में R&D पे काफ़ी खर्च करने की आवश्यकता है। कॉरपोरेट्स को उस पे एंडोमेंट से, जैसा सर ने भी किया है, आपका जो IIT दिल्ली का प्रयास है बहुत ही सुंदर और अच्छा है। प्रॉब्ली अदर कॉरपोरेट हाउसेस शुड कम फॉरवर्ड टू ड्राइव द स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम। इट विल, इसमें कहीं कोई डाउट नहीं है, हम लोग बेस्ट स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम बनने का पोटेंशियल रखते हैं और बन भी सकते हैं, बट उसके लिए एक कड़ी जोड़नी बहुत ज़रूरी है। जब हम लोगों ने ग्लोबल बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस स्टडी किया तो जो देखने में आया कि अमेरिका का जो बेस्ट स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम है वो इसलिए है कि वहाँ के कॉरपोरेट्स इन्वॉल्व हैं उसमें। वहाँ हमारे यहाँ इट इज़ ओनली इंडस्ट्री एकेडमिया के जगह गवर्नमेंट एकेडमिया टू ए लार्ज एक्सटेंट है। उसी कड़ी में हम लोगों ने वी रीच्ड आउट टू मेनी कॉरपोरेट हाउसेज, एंड आई एम थैंकफुल कि HDFC इज वन हु कनेक्टेड विद दिस। एंड हमारा बहुत ज़्यादा तो रोल नहीं है, बट इस बात की बहुत खुशी है कि एटलीस्ट आज अलग जग रहा है, लोग उसमें काम कर रहे हैं। शशांक सर के अभी को फाउंडर हमारे साथ आए थे, इन लोगों ने एक स्टार्टअप सहायक के नाम से बनाया है ऐप। बट प्रोबेबली हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू नो अबाउट द स्टार्टअप सहायक ऐप? सो जो देश में कॉरपोरेट्स अच्छी चीजें कर रहे हैं वो स्टार्टअप इंडिया हमारे साथ मिलके सभी लोगों के लिए उसको उपलब्ध कराए। एंड लास्ट में मैं ये भी कहना चाहूँगा कि जो बार बार ये प्रश्न आता है कि हमें फेलियर से नहीं डरना है, ये एक स्टार्टअप जीवन का अभिन्न हिस्सा है। एंड इनफैक्ट यू विल बी सरप्राइज्ड, इंडिया में एक मैम आपने ये भी बोला था हाउ वी आर डिफरेंट, वी नो हाउ टू पाइवट। हमारे अभी हमने कल ही पार्लियामेंट में एक स्टार्ट क्वेश्चन में आंसर दिया कि एज पर MCA रिकॉर्ड्स विच मेंटेन्स द डेटा ऑफ टोटल स्टार्टअप्स विच हैव क्लोज्ड इन 10 ईयर्स, एंड आप लोग कोई गेस नहीं कर सकते हो। अखबार में तो आता है इतने परसेंट बंद हो जाते हैं, ये हो जाता है, वो हो जाता है। कैन एनीवन गेस आउट ऑफ 2 lakh startups how many startups have actually closed during last 10 years? The amount is less than 3%। तो उसका सर मेन कारण है कि स्टार्टअप जो, I am not saying that all startups are profitable, but people pivot। आज ये नहीं चला क्योर फिट पहले केवल ये जिम का सामान बेचता था, and now you see some time back I saw them making shoes also। They make very good quality t-shirt, as good as Adidas and Nike। Nobody would have thought that Cure Fit, which is known for making gymming equipments, will pivot to some other thing। So this is the beauty of startup ecosystem of India, that they know how to pivot, and जो अपनी जुगाड़ है कुछ ना कुछ निकाल के ले आते हैं। बहुत कम ऐसे इंटरप्रेन्योर्स हैं जो एक्चुअली अपना धंधा छोड़ के फिर नौकरी करने लगते हैं कुछ ना कुछ। एंड एक और अपने स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम की बहुत अच्छी चीज हुई है कि पहले फेलियर को अच्छा नहीं माना जाता था। आज मेरी बहुत सारे फाउंडर से बात हुई, दे लुक फॉरवर्ड टू पीपल हु हैव ट्राइड एंड समहाउ कुडंट सक्सीड। उनको वो हायर करते हैं बिकॉज दे हैव सीन द इंटायर जर्नी। सो फेलियर से डरना नहीं है, अपने को कोशिश करते रहना है। थैंक यू।
Thank you, sir. That's very inspiring. Thank you so much. Uh, Considering we have pushed for time, we'll go quick. So, sir, your vision, given you're in a pioneering new space, you spelled out a lot of opportunities for participation. So, next 10 years, what is your vision for space tech in India?
Thank you, Sonali ji. InSpace came out with a decadal vision report as one of the first activities that it did. And we're talking about a decade from 2023 to 33. Essentially, the decadal vision document has framed a vision. And I talk about the two missions that emerge out of that vision. The first one is a revenue mission. I spoke about the $44 billion. So we have very, very money-minded people there in InSpace, and we want to take it from 8.4 to 44 billion. That's mission number one. The second mission is building the ecosystem which will anchor this journey. An ecosystem that makes it possible for the founders and the startups and the entrepreneurs and for every other stakeholder to be able to take it there and become a sustainable, robust environment which will continue to grow and continue to anchor further growth for the entire industry and the space economy. So we have a multi-pronged strategy which revolves around what I call the 4 C's, just to make it simple. The first is capability building, which means the technologies that are required to move the story forward. The second is capacities, because to have a capability in a lab or to do a demonstration is not adequate. Unless you have the ability to scale it in hundreds, in thousands, that kind of capacity, you're not competitive. The capacities, which means scaling up manufacture, which means having that much of human resource to support all of it. The third is capital. And we run a separate campaign, in fact, towards mobilization of private sector funds for the space sector. We call it the Invest Space campaign. And the fourth is the customer. Because if space and everything to do with space exploration and technology was originally driven by the government and now is to become an economic engine, that engine has to be driven by demand. And so the customer becomes the centerpiece of this entire strategy. So demand generation, demand stimulation, and increasing the consumption of space data and space data products are at the heart of our strategy going ahead. The fifth C really here is caution. It's very easy to get euphoric. Very, very important to handhold this whole journey. Having a vision, having a mission, having a great start that we've had to the space reforms is all very good. We've had 50x increase in the number of space startups in a span of 5 years. No other country has seen this kind of a thing. Just adding to the data point that Sanjiv ji has just shared here. But what is more important is that the journey is only starting. This needs to be handheld. And we have to integrate every element of the ecosystem to be able to work with synergy, to be mutually supporting, and the fragmented scene that you usually see has to be brought together. So that's the caution in the thing.
Thank you. Thank you, EVFG. Vikram, over to you. Very quickly, you've seen the startup evolution in India, as you mentioned earlier. What do you see today are the risks and opportunities with early stage investing, versus what you saw in 2014?
Yeah, I think the trend has clearly shifted from early days to now. A lot of risk taking in deep tech and emerging tech, and we're talking about space tech, defense tech, and we've invested in a company called Dhruva Space, for example, and we are taking risk at even TRL 5-6 stages as a venture capital fund. Even where the product has not yet been launched in the market. So I think now you're seeing the venture capital funds coming at that stage because you can clearly see a path to creating value, substantial value. So we invested in a company called Morphing Machine, which is a semiconductors company, which is still at TRL 6-7 stage. But we're clearly seeing the value it can generate. So I think we are seeing the ability to take higher risk now, especially because the amount of capital available is much larger. And also, I think there has also been a better understanding of the valuations today. even though at deep tech, in deep tech startups, there is always a question mark when you're at TRL stages. It becomes very hard to, but there are models where you can link valuations to the next stages, etc. So the system has evolved. It has become very mature. And I think to earlier point, one important thing is that the Indian entrepreneurs are very resilient and also very cost effective. I think I give the best example of the Chandrayaan 3 mission, which was the $75 million project, while the entire the US NASA mission to moon was a $4 billion project. And I think you can imagine the differences in terms of the mindset of how you think of the costs. So I think that also applies to the Indian entrepreneurs, and which is what is very interesting to see.
Okay, thanks, Vikram. So, turning to you, Gautam, very quickly, what do you think are the structural or ecosystem gaps today that actually hinder growth capital? Because you really come in Series B onwards. So, how do you see what are the gaps today, right? And given the change that you've seen over the years?
You ask a provider of capital, they'll always say there's too much capital in the market. I think, honestly, capital will follow opportunity, right? I think it's a little chicken and egg. It is more chicken and egg at the early stage, I feel. At growth stage, there is no shortage of global capital that is interested in places that people are building exciting companies. The So I actually don't know if there is that much structural to be done. I think there is a reasonable amount of interest in India. There is a reasonable amount of capital that is flowing out of other geographies and has to flow somewhere. I think if we build the companies, the capital will 100% come. There is zero doubt in my mind.
So, you're saying there's enough and more that growth capital can be deployed quickly. There are no challenges?
There are obviously always challenges. If you ask any company, they will say that there are challenges. But I think for the most part, there's a missing middle to some degree. That if you're a company that needs multiple rounds of capital, so if you're a company that needs $200 million to get to product market fit and revenue, right? That capital does not exist in India. When will that capital come? That capital is very hard to come from institutional firms. It can only come from institutional firms when there is a demonstrated history of one success. But that one success ke liye capital will come from where? Typically, it comes from family offices, founders, people are willing to make a long-dated bet, right? Without the expectation or need for immediate payoff or even a 6-7 year payoff. So there is a middle, can we develop, do we have the capital to invest in building, spending $2 billion to build a frontier lab in India? Commercial capital for that is hard. But that is not I don't think that is a quick structural fix. I think we are kidding ourselves if we feel like government can change some rules, we can do something to make it a quick structural fix. I think if we play to our strengths and find areas where we can innovate at lower cost, and we don't need $200 million or $500 million equivalent to build a revenue engine, there's enough capital.
Interesting. Okay, Shashank, to you. I think, Razorpay started out as a payment gateway and then expanded into a full stack banking suite. Given this evolution, I think what do you see as the future today in India's financial infrastructure, new areas that you're going to build? And how can fintechs, banks, and regulators together plug these gaps? As you also, because you also invest, right? And you're doing a lot of investment as well on behalf of yours and Harshal's office. So, how do you see the whole thing coming together in that sense? Especially, to the point that he makes, because you guys have actually been able to have the benefit when you built off growth capital, scaling, building. So, what is your, how do you come at it?
So, I think at least in the next 10 years, the biggest shift in software world is broadly going to be AI. And that is going to impact every single sector, every single work stream, right? Every single workflow that is present. And, our workflows in India are largely so unique, especially on the B2B side, that a lot of that adoption will be completely domestic. I think 10 years ago, the IT spends of most of the enterprises in the country used to flow outside. Broadly, a lot of Western firms that used to sell enterprise software products. But I think that has been shifting. So now today, even for all the banks, for example, there is a huge amount of spends that goes towards IT, tens of thousands of crores, which are very much open to startups in the country. And I've seen some of the AI startups that are coming up that are selling voice solutions, that are selling collection solutions, right? Uh, and you can pretty much look at every single area that a large corporate, a large bank spends from a financial solution perspective or software solution lens, and you can build large, meaningful companies, on that side, right? So and we have heard stories of Bajaj Finance, for example, deploying AI successfully in various work streams. I think that will be open for all the financial sector companies, right? Credit is always going to be a large story in the country, and we'll see a lot of new innovative credit models coming up. I think we're still, scratching the surface on that front. Like a lot of new alternate data sets are available. Uh, we have to figure out like how to continue leveraging that for underwriting better in a significant way. If you ask me more from a regulatory lens, like what can be done more, or from a policy lens, right? I think the regulator has done really well in opening up a lot of sectors. So whether you look at payments, which has obviously done really well with UPI being a centerpiece. If you look at even credit cards, for example, I'm seeing that a lot of new fintechs have come up, and a lot more co-branded credit card issuance has been happening. I think one area where I still think there's a lot of innovation left and policy enablement can be there is more on the digital banking side. Uh, because if you look at UK, US, South America, even Southeast Asia, I think there's a lot of digital banking stories that have come up. Uh, I think in India, large banks have done a great role in taking banking to the masses, but a lot of niche use cases, like where do you find, like you have seen, we have large FMCG brands like HUL and Unilever, HUL and ITC and others, for example. But and still you have a lot of D2C startups coming in. But in banking, for example, you can build very small niche specialized digital banks for, let's say, just teenagers, or let's say people who are above 50 plus, or let's say for women who are in tier 3 cities. But that last mile is really lacking in India because I think policy enablement is not there. And you can very very much create policies to encourage that innovation in partnership with the larger banks that are laying down the rails all over the country, right? So I think that's one innovation piece that still can come out really better by partnership of the banking ecosystem and the regulators together.
Thank you. And I think with that, we are sorry, we are really running behind schedule today. Thank you very much for being a lovely panel. Thank you once again, Sanjiv ji, for coming in Parliament session to Bombay, and AVMG for flying in from Ahmedabad, and our fellow investors, and Shashank, thanks for being here today. Thank you.